When massive storms unleash torrential rain, floodwaters savage the landscape.
We looked up, and there was a car just rolling over and over in the front of it.
Those who can't reach high ground cling to survival.
How many are there of you? Oh, there's about 40. How many? 40?
Desperate rescues are their only hope.
We were whipped from here down, and the water kept coming up and up and up and up.
Few understand the force of a flood.
I was completely amazed about the power the water has in just a few inches.
And man's attempts to tame wild rivers can result in disaster.
We no longer have small floods that happen frequently. We have very big, destructive floods that cause much more damage.
As storm waters rise, more communities must struggle to beat the powerful forces of floods. It moves like a turbulent liquid wind. And hits like a fluid battering ram. In a flood, a river can take life as easily as it gives. A testament to the power of water. This force isn't always apparent. In its natural state, a river's vast watershed acts like a giant organic sponge. The majority of rainwater is absorbed by soil. Vegetation aids evaporation. Remove the natural landscape, or pave it over, and a foundation for disaster is laid. In cities all over the world, like Le Bay in Canada's Quebec province, development centers around rivers. Here, as water runs down the rocky hillsides of the Laurentian Mountains, gravity gives the rivers enormous power. The dams built to harness that power are already stressed by a season of rain in July of 1996. When the most powerful storm in a century strikes, 11 inches, or 3 months' worth of rain, falls in just 36 hours. Concrete and asphalt reduce the friction that normally slows water down. Some dams can't take the strain and overtop. As the water picks up velocity, its destructive power increases drastically. And when channeled through steep city streets, the flood's focused power pushes large objects. Turbulence pries loose earth and debris, increasing the flood's destructive mass. People are cut off from rescue as roads wash away. Hundreds of families are forced from their homes. "3,000 flood victims must be rescued by helicopter on the first day alone. The Canadian Air Force plays Noah in a disaster of biblical proportions. Rescuers like Mario Chasson are unprepared for the scale of the devastation.
We didn't know what to expect when it first started. Like, you had, just as an example, you had a river usually 100 feet wide. They are now 1,000 feet wide. Like water level from the basement to the second story of a house within 6 hours.
Computers aid geomorphology, the study of the forces that shape the land. John Kelmelis specializes in floods.
Rain comes, rolls off the tops of the hills into the floodplain, and the rivers swell, and they flow onto the floodplain. These floods have been going on since before man was beginning to settle North America during the ice ages. And when there are really bad floods, they flood beyond their floodplains. It's a natural phenomenon that erosion takes place and new landscapes are being built.
Here, erosion that might have taken eons occurs in one day and one night.
I was just absolutely amazed at the amount of damage that occurred along some stretches of river.
Dr. Greg Brooks is with a Canadian geological team sent to survey the disaster.
Quite simply, the energy of the water was able to erode the banks of the river with so much water and so much energy. The net result was that we have literally several hundred meters of bank erosion.
The Quebec flood causes $704 million worth of damage and forces the relocation of 15,000 people. It is called the worst natural catastrophe in Canadian history. As the floodwaters recede, 10 people are found dead. Many more are missing.
They found my sister, but no one's been able to find my children.
The anguish caused by a flood echoes throughout history.
Rivers normally flood. It's their natural way to exist. Every river will start developing an area that it floods, flows over its banks and onto a plain that it's established, and that's called the floodplain. Those floodplains are generally very fertile. They're very good places for agriculture, but they're also high hazard areas.
When we, as the human race, decided to move next to the river, we challenged nature, and we've been in this battle ever since.
Dr. Jerry Galloway is a flood expert who's followed the course of rivers throughout history.
As far back as we can look, we've seen that there's been this struggle between the people who have wanted to live along the rivers and the river itself.
Dr. Galloway says a classic example is Italy's ancient city of Florence, set on the Arno River in the Tuscan foothills. Florence's problem predates the Italian Renaissance, when the hills were cleared for farming.
In the 1600s, they began a deforestation upriver from Florence so that when the water falls on the ground, there is no absorption by the vegetation, and that caused more flow to come down into the city.
Floods became so frequent that artist Michelangelo advised his nephew to stay away from Florence. The worst flood hit in 1966.
You just had a mass of water coming through a city, and the river had no place else to go.
As in Quebec, helicopters provided the only means of rescue for some. The impact of the water increased as it forced through narrow streets. Florentines declared the disaster worse than World War II, as the deluge destroyed everything in its path. Overflowing sewers joined the flood, polluting water supplies and leaving the streets coated in stinking mud. This time, the Arno claimed 113 lives. The Tuscan region continues to be plagued by floods to this day. In 1996, the Arno's tributaries gave way. After torrential storms, rivers ran wild through an area just west of Florence, killing 11 people. Yet after every flood, communities all over the world rebuild, forgetting the unpredictable but relentless timetable of the weather.
The hazard from a future flood of similar magnitude still remains. The public, they forget about the hazard. It's, oh yes, there was the big flood of '54, but that was years ago. That's not going to happen again. Well, it might happen again.
And it will, when unusually heavy storms sweep through the Sierra Mountains of the American West. January 1997, Northern California. High in the Sierra Mountains, 3 feet of snow melts in an unusual warm spell, sending water gushing out of the mountains. It's already been a wetter than average winter in a region where water is usually scarce. Rivers are swollen to capacity from Northern California to Nevada. Downstream, the floodplain is protected by levees, raised earthen banks built along large stretches of river. Several generations of California farmers built up the levees in an effort to keep floods under control.
As far back as the gold rush, we began to see problems in California on the Sacramento and in the San Joaquin areas. Heavy flows out of the mountains would cause damage. The federal government and the local governments have been active since the 1850s in trying to deal with this particular problem.
A massive system of dams was also built to control floods and to irrigate this semi-desert region. But when raised banks artificially increase the quantity of water in a channel and bring the level above the surrounding floodplain, levees can actually increase a river's destructive potential.
If you build levees, they'll protect the land behind the levees for as long as the levees hold. But at some point, the levees will overtop, or at some point, levees will breach.
When another Pacific storm sweeps into the Sierras, a month's worth of rain falls in just 2 days. The 150-year-old system of flood control reaches the breaking point. To relieve pressure on the reservoirs, a dozen dams open their sluice gates. Enough water pours from one of the dams to fill 22 Olympic swimming pools per minute. The massive discharge rampages through the rivers below.
When the floods got so large, the levees actually caused the problem because the water had to force through in some areas.
The river breaks through the levees in dozens of places, carving out huge chunks of earth and asphalt. Levee breaks sweep cars off the road, and people must be rescued from rooftops. Like Marianne Ottorino and her husband.
We were whipped from here down, and the water kept coming up and up and up and up. We didn't know what to do, so we stood on top of the car all night long.
Almost 2,000 homes are damaged. The powerful currents eat away at their foundations. A mobile home park is swept downstream. The desert city of Reno is submerged when the Truckee River crests at 15 feet above flood level. After it recedes, the flood leaves a thick layer of mud and debris. Some victims are angry.
It's not my idea of a good time. All the politicians talk about doing something about the river, but it never seems to get done.
Others are chastened.
A couple of days before this happened, I was watching the floods in Napa, and I felt sorry for the people, thinking I understood what they were going through, but standing here now, not owning anything, absolutely nothing that I ever had before is completely gone. I can tell you, you don't know. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they're feeling. It's pretty tough.
This scene can happen anywhere people live on a floodplain. Tens of thousands of miles of levees thread through the United States. In Georgia, a tropical storm dumps 25 inches of rain in 24 hours in 1994. The rivers strain to free themselves of their man-made constraints. In one rural community, 6 old earth dams break simultaneously. A wall of water slams into homes and businesses, killing 16 people and causing panic in the streets.
We can try to get through the other streets.
When an emergency rescue team underestimates the river's speed, they too become victims.
Oh gosh.
There's a guy under that tree there.
They cling to trees downstream, waiting to be plucked to safety. 31 people drown in this flood, the worst natural disaster ever to hit Georgia. But no match for a major flood on the Mississippi, 6th largest river in the world. Seen from space, it's a glittering ribbon across America.
The entire Mississippi River Basin covers over 40% of the lower 48 states. Even though most people think of the Midwest as being very, very flat, there's a significant amount of change in elevation and change in types of terrain. Anything that takes place in the Mississippi River Basin is bound to affect somebody, someplace in the United States.
Over 2,000 miles of levees line this mighty river, a shipping lane that spans America. For over a century, a massive project has been underway to control floods on this meandering giant.
Trying to keep the rivers within their banks is a lifetime occupation. It's heroic in the sense that it requires a great deal of effort, one that perhaps is superhuman. You are dealing with nature, and it is something that certainly stretches the capabilities of the human race. Some would contend far beyond where it ought to be.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built a system that has protected the lower Mississippi for 70 years.
Got it.
But in 1993, levees on the upper part of the river, many built by locals, are tested to their utmost. Communities rally to strengthen their levees against the most prolonged heavy rain the American Midwest has ever seen. Over the course of 150 days of floods, volunteers shoveled 927 million pounds of sand into 26 million bags. But their last line of defense is not always enough.
Better get some bags here quick.
Upstream from the town of St. Genevieve, a levee starts to fail. In a desperate attempt to save his town, the levee manager drives a backhoe on the dangerously crumbling embankment. Despite Vern Bowman's determination, the force of water proves too strong. It's a crushing blow to a man who spent his career trying to protect communities. Dozens of levees, especially the older, unregulated ones, collapse under the water's weight. A wide swath of America's heartland is destroyed. More than 6 million acres are flooded. 48 people are killed. The disaster contributes to a growing realization about the price of progress.
If we didn't have levees, you would have more frequent flooding on most of the floodplain, but you wouldn't have, in many of those areas, as severe flooding.
St. Louis, Missouri, Illinois area.
In the wake of the Mississippi floods, Jerry Galloway heads a presidential task force to analyze the extent of the damage.
The next flood comes, if they rebuild, it's going to flood these people over here.
John Kelmelis contributes with sophisticated satellite cartography. He's particularly struck by soil damage found along the river.
These areas that are circled are major breaks in the levees. Right after the flood, there were a series of sand dunes over what was good agricultural land.
Sand had streamed from the levee breaks, leaving farmland ruined long after the waters receded. This and other flood effects brought damages to $12 billion.
The other cost that is not often totaled up are these non-quantifiable costs. What about the trauma to the families that are affected by this? We underestimate the power of water because most people never have really come in contact with it until it's too late.
The power of water will strike again when a bus full of teenagers comes in contact with a raging river in Texas. It's July in the Texas Hill Country. Where playing in the Guadalupe River is a teenage rite of passage. But in the summer of 1987, unusually heavy rains caused the river to burst its banks. A summer playground quickly becomes a death trap. The worst tragedy occurs when a busload of teenagers is swept away, leaving survivors clinging to the treetops. 17-year-old Chris Ray is one of the first to be plucked from the lethal currents.
How many are there of you? There's about 40. How many? 40. In the bus?
After scrambling out of the stalled bus, Chris and his friends were engulfed by a 10-foot wave.
The bus wouldn't go no more, it just started sinking. And the water started getting real high, and our youth pastor said, let's get out and try to get to the bank.
Instead, they are fighting for their lives.
It really didn't hit me what was going on until the second wave of water hit and it picked up the bus. And you could hear the tidal wave. You could just hear the screams and the panic of screams. I mean, it's just the worst sound you ever hear. And I'm like, God, how am I gonna get out of this? Are you gonna let me live today or am I gonna die today?
Children as young as 11 cling to the trees for up to 5 hours before the helicopters can fly the last ones to safety.
About an hour.
About an hour? What was going through your mind right then?
Scared, terrified because I can't swim.
But some are too exhausted to hang on.
There she is right there, Mike. She's floating in the water right there. She's still okay. Right there. There she is, right there.
14-year-old Melanie Finley is battered by the churning water. A firefighter makes a last desperate leap to grab the terrified child. But she slips past him in the fast-moving current. The crew can only watch as she's washed away beneath the trees. It takes 4 days to find 9 of the 10 children who died that day. The body of one of Chris's friends remains lost to the river forever. Today, the tragedy is marked by a simple memorial.
Those lost in the tragedy were John Bankston, Melanie Finley, Leslie Gossett, Regina Keenum, Michael Lane, Michael O'Neill, Cindy Sewell, William Sewell, Stacy Smith, Tanya Smith. And you look at it now, you're like, well, how could water get up that high? And it's just amazing what water could do. Mother Nature could do almost anything out here.
As more people live, work, and play in flood zones, it's all too easy to underestimate the lethal power of a river.
When you worry about water as your opponent, you've got to recognize that it's got a tremendous amount of mass. A cubic foot of water, 1 foot on a side, weighs 62 pounds. As a matter of fact, water 12 to 24 inches deep can spill a pedestrian trying to get through a stream. Not much more water than that in a rapidly moving stream can carry away a vehicle.
Cars and trucks are swept away every season on the Los Angeles River system. Some 2,500 miles of concrete channels flow through the city. Those caught in the torrent can quickly be swept to their deaths. And homeless people live on the river. Children play here.
Many of these channels are in people's backyards. They don't always associate it with danger. There are people that skateboard in these channels.
Swiftwater 44s, go ahead and tie that red tape on it so they know what they're looking for.
Captain Jack Wise heads an elite LA rescue squad dedicated to saving victims of this fast-moving drainage system.
The water that comes through these channels was designed to do one thing, and that is to get out of the LA area, go from the one end to the ocean as fast and as quick as possible.
Okay, just relax.
The LA River is the squad's training ground. Firefighters like Ernesto Ojeda have learned to see the river from a drowning person's perspective.
You can position yourself by just simply turning your head, slightly backstroking, and let the water push you to the other side. That way you don't waste all your energy swimming when you really can't do much.
The final challenge in this fast-flowing obstacle course is a standing wall of water.
It's constant, it's relentless. Once you get into these channels, there's no way out of them.
Each year, the Swiftwater Rescue team pulls at least 10 people from the treacherous currents.
He's not in a fire helicopter trying to get the rescue person on the end of the hoist in position. Okay, he's 20 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet. Hey, he got him! He's got him! Hurry, let's go! The pararescue man has let go. He couldn't hang on. He is reaching out for the line. He grabbed it. He's got it. Looks like firefighters and spectators, people, normal citizens helping out. He's out.
This drama had a happy ending, but 1/3 of Swiftwater victims are would-be rescuers. Police officer Mike Grasso was well aware of this in 1995 when he leapt into the LA River to save 7-year-old Jordan Bastasi, who was washed away while playing beside the channel.
The plan was not to let the boy drown. That's all the plan was. And I broke every single rule by going in the water. Once you're in it, you're committed. You're on a freight train flying in one direction.
The Swiftwater Rescue team rushes to the scene.
Everyone was there, close enough to almost touch, but no one could get to us. The boy was starting to go into shock, and we were precarious where we were, and I felt pretty helpless.
With the clock ticking, the emergency team first calls a helicopter to the rescue. But the downdraft threatens to blast Grasso and the boy back into the water. 35 tense minutes pass while the Swiftwater Rescue team comes up with another solution. They set up a makeshift crane using a fire ladder so they can suspend a man above the channel and carefully maneuver him directly over the two trapped people.
Jordan kept on moaning and telling me was that he wanted to get out. He wanted to be out of the water. He wanted to go home. And I kept on telling him that that's what we're doing.
As Jordan is treated for hypothermia, his rescuer is returned to safety.
And as they put us down, I noticed that I couldn't feel anything from my chest down. I finally realized that the cold was so cold and so numbing that my legs and my back, everything was numb and gone. I just collapsed to the ground.
Both policeman and child survived their brush with water power. It's a rare victory in a city that's faced the destructive energy of raging water many times before. Sometimes with devastating results. For 330 days of the year, the 10 million inhabitants of Los Angeles live in a region as arid as the Sahara. But in the brief rainy season, sometimes the problem is too much water. Overflowing drainage channels rage through the city. Vicious winter storms saturate the dry, bare mountains surrounding the LA basin, triggering dangerous mudslides. Los Angeles owes its very existence to a controversial century-old battle to capture and control seasonal stormwater from the Sierras and beyond. Precious H2O is diverted from rivers and lakes hundreds of miles away. It's transported across deserts, pumped up hills and through mountains, and into LA, where it's stored behind dams high above the densely populated basin. This vast network stands as a testament to an era of confidence that engineering could solve any problem, including building a dam above a crowded subdivision in an area riddled with fault lines and oil wells.
If you remove oil from the sands and gravel that create the oil reservoir, there's a void created, and the weight of the earth is going to cause subsidence or settlement in that area.
Laval Lund was one of the men who helped construct the dam.
The reservoir was designed with the knowledge that there would be subsidence, and they knew that there were certain faults in that area.
But on December 14, 1963, this delicately balanced system springs a terrifying leak. At first, the water draining down the streets of the Baldwin Hills neighborhood is no more than a minor inconvenience. But above this quiet community, 300 million gallons of water is waiting to do what all water behind dams would do, given the chance.
It is gnawing at the periphery, looking for ways to get out of the constraints in which you've placed it. It's looking for channels to go through the banks alongside the dam, to go underneath the dam.
It starts with a silty seepage at the base of the dam. Then cracks appear on both sides of the earth-filled walls. Water engineers try to empty the reservoir. But as the leak increases, they realize the dam is close to collapsing.
The Baldwin Hills Dam may break. You are urged to evacuate your homes immediately. Go to higher
ground. Once the deluge reaches critical mass, it rips through steel and concrete. The final catastrophic breakthrough is as inevitable as it is swift. The result is 5 dead and $10 million of damage. As residents survey the ruins of their homes, engineers survey the remains of the dam, trying to work out what went wrong. Although they had calculated for subsidence, they hadn't planned for new oil extraction methods. Many came to believe that the technique of using high-pressure water to flush out oil deposits weakened the land surrounding the reservoir.
And it broke through eventually. It broke through the 10-foot compacted earth blanket and then caused the erosion of that material down through the crack, through the bottom of the reservoir, and then out to the canyon below.
Although such dramatic failures are rare, Los Angeles suffers almost annual crises because of its volatile seasonal rainstorms and its attempts at flood control. Ill-conceived water construction projects are what hydrological engineer Leonard Sklar works to oppose. He believes LA's river system is a classic example of urban intervention gone wrong.
What we've done is to pave over so much of our watersheds that the 2/3 of the rainfall that used to soak in now goes directly into the river channel. The second thing that we've done to natural river channels is to wall them off from their floodplain. But when the water can't get past the levees, it piles up in the central channel, making the floods more dangerous and more destructive. It's essentially like pitching your tent on a railroad track. It's asking for trouble.
To protect people from floods, the Sepulveda Dam was built, and the flood basin behind it turned into a park.
If you were to ask people that live in Los Angeles what the Sepulveda flood basin was, they would tell you it was a recreation area. It was a place where we play golf.
But cameraman Larry Welk sees a different scene when the worst storm in 50 years triggers a flash flood. The dam protects communities downstream, but the basin behind it fills so fast that people in the park are trapped. Larry Welk flies over the scene, filming the surging water from a news helicopter.
Nobody remembers the Sepulveda flood basin flooding like it did, even though it's a dam, and that's what it's supposed to do.
Police and firefighters are among the stranded. Helicopter crews rush to save drowning people. In the haste to save everyone, mistakes are made. As Welk and his pilot make their way back to base, they spot Carlos Romero desperately clinging to debris. He's a homeless man who'd been living near the dam.
The log that he was holding on to was drifting closer and closer to the outlet of the dam, and it would have been certain death.
They try to take the chopper down close enough to the water for the man to grab a hold of the rails. But he's too weak to hang on and falls.
That was time for me to put the camera down, and it was time to do something.
Welk decides to jump into the water himself while his chopper rushes off to get help.
I was fearful that we were going to be swept into the LA River. It was the most frightening few minutes of my life.
As emergency crews rush to the rescue, the helicopter returns. 2 rescuers join Welk in the water to stabilize their position. Eventually, help arrives. Romero and his rescuer are ferried to safety.
They flew him via air ambulance to the hospital, and he had severe hypothermia. But he came through, and he made it. And it was because we were in the right spot at the right time. I just felt so good at that point. Another 5 minutes might have been curtains for us.
It's a powerful lesson that even small dams, functioning as planned, can be deadly. But when a monster dam fails, the destructive power is unstoppable. Snake River Falls in Idaho, rushing down from the mountains of the American West, is a magnificent example of the power of water. Harnessing this power and trying to control the cycle of drought and flood became an American obsession during an era of great dam construction.
And so Boulder Dam stands today, a modern colossus.
But it was here on the Snake River Valley that man's belief that he could tame the wilderness reached its peak. Engineers spent 30 years coming up with a way to control the river. The Teton Dam, thicker than 5 football fields at its base and 30 stories high. Like everyone who lived below the giant structure, Verl Bird couldn't conceive of it collapsing.
We heard on the radio that the dam has got a leak in it and the dam's going to break. Nah, that don't happen.
But he couldn't have been more wrong. While it is being filled, the mighty Teton Dam bursts. The water power in the reservoir behind it equals 250,000 tons of TNT. 2 million cubic feet per second gush out, smashing 2 towns off the map before raging downstream toward Verl.
We looked up just a city block, and there it was. There was a car just rolling over and over in the front of it. They just stood straight up and pushed all the garbage and all of that. That had to have been 8 feet high.
Bird and his father-in-law run for a playground slide anchored in solid concrete. For 6 hours, they are stranded, watching much of their neighborhood float away. As floodwaters recede, 8 people are found dead. Tens of thousands are forced from their homes. Most of the city of Rexburg is destroyed. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, which built this and many other dams throughout the western states, concluded that faulty construction was to blame.
When the Teton Dam failed, people began to look around at what we were doing in dam construction. Many of the projects that have been built over the last century have prevented billions of dollars of damages and saved thousands and thousands of lives. In many other cases, they've been unnecessary and in some cases counterproductive.
We had the idea that technology could really solve all our problems. We've learned the hard way that it's not that simple, that we make trade-offs. We no longer have small floods that happen frequently. We have very big, destructive floods that happen less frequently, but in fact cause much more damage. The era of building big dams for flood control is over.
But this belief is slow to catch on in developing countries, where big dam building projects are increasingly popular. In China, the government is building a dam across the mighty Yangtze River. Construction of the Three Gorges Dam could take 20 years and cost more than $30 billion. 800 villages in the Yangtze Valley will be submerged, displacing 1.2 million people. The Chinese believe this technological marvel will generate the electricity needed to compete in the information age. But the construction of the world's largest reservoir has many experts worried.
The dam building industry estimates that about 1% of the new dams being built today will fail catastrophically, and that's a lot of time bombs each year being built around the world.
I don't believe that a totally structural approach, that is building levees and building dams, is the best method, nor do I believe that you can go back to the way it was prior to levees and dams. I believe we have the world as it is now. In some areas, you have to use levees. Other areas, we want to return to natural habitat. So it's a balance between what man can do and what nature has done.
2 decades after the Teton Dam collapse, a Boy Scout troop in Idaho recreates a wetland by a reservoir. The restored vegetation will absorb and capture water and aid evaporation. It will lessen the danger downstream of the floods mankind will always face.
I'm just impressed by the awesome power of nature, that how small we are and how insignificant we are. And the floods are going to continue far longer than we'll be able to have an impact on them.
I was completely amazed about the power that the water has. In just a few inches, it'll just kick your feet out from under you and take you down for the ride.
All you see is just water just coming everywhere. It's the force of it coming at you. I mean, it's just like a cold chill coming down. You're wondering, am I gonna make it through this?
People have said to me, isn't there anything you guys could have done to prevent this? There's no way. Mother Nature just took back what belongs to her, and there's no stopping that.